This is from chapter 2 called Negroes Every Day Are Being Molested, from our text At the Dark End of the Street. This chapter starts out talking about Ella Ree Jones, a student at Alabama State Teachers College in Montgomery, Alabama, who boarded a bus, the Cleveland Avenue bus, the bus that Rosa Parks would make famous 13 years later. She boarded this bus one day in July of 1942 and took a seat in the colored section. She wasn't feeling well. When the bus driver noticed a white man standing, he ordered Ella Ree to get up. Because she was ill, she refused. The driver suddenly stopped, made sure the back door was locked, and called the police. Granted police powers, bus drivers enforced segregation with an iron fist. The complaint records of the Birmingham buses are riddled with reports of drivers beating, shooting, and even killing black passengers. "I'm going to teach you to do what the white man tells you to do," said the driver, as the police snatched Ella Ree from her seat and forced her into a police car. At City Hall, the officers dragged Ella Ree behind the building and beat her with a pipe. After a very violent scene, they charged her with suspicion, held her in jail overnight, refused her medical care, and took her to court the next morning. There she was fined $28. The day after, she filed a complaint with the national NAACP, where the young and celebrated attorney Thurgood Marshall was working for the Legal Defense Fund. Though appalled by the facts and interested in taking it to court, Thurgood Marshall's problem was that there were too many cases and too few resources. Randy, can you start, you and Vanita start with discussing the questions? Someone's ringing the bell. I want to go see if they're trying to come to our group. Okay?
Okay, so Vanita, do you want to answer this question first? First question was, how did it feel reading about the case of Ella Ree Jones?
I feel very sad. And it sounds very familiar.
Okay, I'm back.
Vanita's just answering the first discussion question.
Okay.
And that was, how do you feel reading about the case of Ella Ree Jones? Mm-hmm. As I was telling Randy, it really saddens me, but it's not a new revelation. I've heard of many cases of these things happening, and I actually brings to mind an incident that happened when I was a child at my godparents' house at 12th and Pine in Center City, Philadelphia, where I spent probably 70% of my time, from the time I was a baby until probably right for my teenage years. My godmother, which I call her lovingly grandmom, and my godfather, they were more mature people. We were riding a trolley car. In Philadelphia, you have trolley cars that are on tracks, and you have trackless trolley cars, the ones where you have the wires, electricity, and they're just have regular wheels like cars. However, make a long story short, we got on the trolley car, and we were on our way downtown, Center City, Philadelphia. Actually, this was in Center City, and we were on our way from 12th and Pine, probably about 6 blocks down to Market Street. So we decided to catch the trolley. It was a very hot day in the summer, and of course, for those that have not lived in the city, when it's 80 in the suburbs, it's 120 there. The heat is the asphalt is so hot, and it was just awful. So we got in the trolley. It was on a Saturday. It was pretty crowded, and my grandmother and I took a seat on the trolley car. Well, it was at that point everyone was sitting down. There might have been, and it was all Caucasian area that they lived in, mind you. She was black. And there was a woman that got on the bus, and my grandmother or godmother said to me, Vanita, no, she looked at me and I looked at her, and she proceeded to get up to give this Caucasian woman her seat. So I looked at her. I was probably about 9 years old. And I says, Grandma, don't get up. You sit right there. And she's like, well, no, baby. No big deal. She was a pretty cool person, and she was a rebel in her own right. I think that day she just didn't feel like it. So I says, well, no. She can stand up. She's not old. You know. It had never dawned on me, her being white. I was raised as a black, in our family, you respect the elders, and the elder got on the bus or a trolley car, you get up and give them your seat. Well, she was not elder, she was not black, and she wasn't old. So I said, well, no, Grandma, you sit right there. So when I think about what happened to Ella Ree Jones, and this was in the 60s, the latter part of the 60s, I would say, probably 68 or 69, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I reckon that might have really caused a huge uproar if I was in the backwoods of Alabama or Georgia. So it's yeah. So it's painful for me. It's scary. It's just painful to think that we can be treated as if we're not humans. It's just very painful.
Yeah.
Very painful.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I actually don't have any stories like that in my personal history. And so for me, as much as I have heard about discrimination on buses, I found the stories. This whole chapter has a lot of violence in it, a lot of it connected to things that happened on buses. So I found it really alarming, jarring, worse than I had ever imagined. Randy?
I was very, very shocked to read the story of Ella, especially when the book mentioned that she was beat with a pipe by the police officers. I'm used to reading stories about where black men are heavily harassed and violently beat and lynched, but not so much when it comes to black women. And so it was very, I don't know, it was very sad. It was very hard, very difficult to read, and to consider a time when black women weren't considered women, or women worthy of being taken care of. Because again, as the book stated over and over again in this chapter, had the situation been reversed and had it been a white woman, this would have been unheard of.
Right.
So it was difficult to read, and a realization for me. And like I said, Vanita, last week, this is the first time I've ever heard of this book, or in this history, honestly. When we learned about Rosa Parks and civil rights movement, we don't hear about the little things that.
Hey, excuse me, Randy. I'm getting a lot of background noise from somewhere. Do you guys know? Do you have any noise in your background?
My family's home, but they're.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
They're looking around like.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But yeah, it was difficult to read.
Yeah.